Hi readers, Chris here. Today I thought it would be fun to do a mid-year check-in and talk about some of my favorite books from so far this year, 2021. I'm actually getting ready to go on a bit of a vacation. I may already be on vacation by the time I post this video, but I am pre-recording something so that you will have some fun videos, hopefully, to watch while I'm out on vacation. So again, I'm just going to talk about some of my favorite books from this year, starting with my favorite YA science fiction of the year, The Diabolic. I read this book back in January, in the beginning of the year, and it was actually recommended to me by one of my followers over on Instagram. If you didn't know, I do ask for recommendations on my Instagram a couple times a year because I always like to read books that are recommended to me by readers such as yourself. I would like to be able to do this on YouTube too at some point going forward. So once I hit, I think 100 subscribers, I might start doing that. So if you're not already subscribed, then please make sure that you hit that button. So anyway, The Diabolic, in case you don't know, it's about a young girl who in this world is a diabolic, which is a genetically engineered being, and diabolics are created to basically protect someone. So they are genetically engineered and then they are bonded to a specific person, and they are basically like kind of in love with that person. They will protect that person unto death no matter what. They kind of have super strength, all these super skills. So in this tale we have Nemesis. She is a diabolic and she has been bonded to the daughter of this senator. And because this is science fiction, it takes place in space, so she's a space senator's daughter, kind of like a space princess. Now, this senator's family kind of falls out of favor with the emperor and the court, the galactic court. So they summon this princess, which is kind of like a dangerous thing. So they send Nemesis in her place. So Nemesis has to pretend to be a normal, not even a normal girl. She has to pretend to be a senator's daughter and not reveal her true nature, all the while kind of playing these political intrigue type games. I really love this story. It really surprised me, and the reason that this makes my list is because all of my favorite books are the ones that get an emotional response out of me, and there is one scene in particular that made me cry. It came out of nowhere, like I was not expected, and it has to do with animals. And if you can't tell because of my furry friends, I have a soft spot in my heart for animals. So when this scene happened, it just, like, I had to put the book down and walk away. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. So anyway, that is why Diabolic is definitely one of my favorite reads of the year so far. We'll see if it stays on my top 10 by the end of the year. Next up, we have my favorite adult fantasy, or grimdark, which is The Poppywar. The Poppywar and The Dragon Republic, which is the sequel. I don't have that one because I lent it to someone. But The Poppywar and The Dragon Republic, I love them both. I actually think I like The Dragon Republic slightly more. I've already done reviews for these, but basically it's a grimdark fantasy. In this world, we have a young girl named Rin who has these shamanic powers. So she's kind of a shaman. She has the power to summon a god. And even though it's a fantasy world, it's based on China and ancient Chinese history. There's a lot of warfare in here. It gets very dark, very violent. There's a lot of violence, a lot of war, a lot of drug use, a lot of someone's biting my toes. Hold on. Oh, okay. Anywho, so The Poppywar, if you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend it. Even though, again, like I said, it does get dark, I really like that. I felt like it's totally different from so much fantasy that I've read lately because it does go so dark. I absolutely loved it, both of them. So definitely, if you're looking for a new fantasy, this one is top of my list. at least one, if not both of these, will probably end up on my top 10 by the end of the year. Moving on to my favorite horror book of the year so far, and that is going to be Christine by Stephen King. Now, again, I'm a little biased because my full name is Christine and the book is called Christine, so that kind of already makes me like it. But out of all the Stephen King books that I've read this year, this one is my favorite so far. I am on a journey to read all of Stephen King's books. So this year so far, I have read The Gunslinger, I've read Christine, I've read The Talisman, Cycle of the Werewolf, and right now I'm reading Thinner. This one is absolutely my favorite so far. It's about a young boy and his car. The car is named Christine, and this boy kind of becomes obsessed with her, but Christine kind of has a mind of her own, and she's kind of evil, and it's just a great book. This book is the perfect, example of how to build tension. From the very first page, when they see Christine on the side of the road, till it just builds and builds and builds and builds until, the end. It's such an amazing book, so much fun. I absolutely loved it. I love everything about it. So if you are looking for a good horror book and you haven't read this one, because it's a little bit older now, I definitely recommend giving Christine a try. Next, I have a contemporary fiction recommendation. That's going to be The Girl with the Louding Voice. This was another book that was recommended to me by one of my followers over on Instagram. And honestly, I was a little bit unsure about this at first because this book is definitely out of my normal comfort zone. It's about a young girl growing up in rural Nigeria and the things that she has to go through from, basically being sold off to a man, having to, be sexually abused to bear his children. She kind of escapes that and tries to go live in the city, but then the city has its own, set of unpleasant circumstances. This poor girl goes through a lot, and at times it's very hard to read. But the thing that I love about this book so much is that the main character, Aduni is her name, no matter what happens to her, no matter how dark things get, she never loses her spirit. She never loses sight of her dreams. She never loses her desire to be better, to make herself better, to have a voice, to educate herself. She's just such a hopeful character that it makes me, the reader, feel hopeful. So I absolutely loved this book. Again, it was a total surprise. I'm surprised I ended up loving it as much as I did because, again, it's not in my normal repertoire of books, but I ended up really loving The Girl with the Louding Voice. So if you've heard about this one and been thinking about it, definitely a recommendation from me. We'll see if it makes it into my top 10. There's a very good chance unless something else really good comes up in the second half of the year. Next, I'm going to talk about my favorite YA fantasy. I do read a lot of YA fantasy. It is one of my favorite genres, just fantasy in general. And I feel like this year so far, I've read a lot of YA fantasy, and a lot of it has just been okay. But the one that surprised me more than anything was actually Tales from the Shadowhunteracademy. Now, this is a series of short stories by Cassandra Clare, sarahreesbrennan, Maureenjohnson, and Robinwasserman. So there's a couple different authors that worked on this book. But if you've ever heard Cassandra Clare, she does the whole Shadowhunter world. She's done a ton of books, and this book is supposed to kind of take place after her first series, The Mortal Instruments, and it focuses on one of the side characters, this boy named Simon. Now, there's a lot of things that happen to Simon in the Mortal Instruments series, and this series of short stories kind of covers his time at the Shadowhunter Academy. long story short, he kind of ends up losing his memory. So this series of stories is about him like regaining his memory, regaining his sense of self, and figuring out where he fits in. And the reason that this is on my list is actually because of the ending. I'm not gonna lie, when I first started reading this book, I was kind of like, what the heck is this? Because it doesn't feel like a typical short story book. It's more of just chapters in like a story, if that makes sense. Like they go in chronological order. But by the time we got to the end, there is something very emotionally impactful that happens. And I actually found myself in tears, like crying because of what happened at the end. I couldn't believe it. It shocked me. But that is why Tales from the Shadowhunter made it onto my list of best so far this year. Next, I'm going to talk about my favorite historical fiction book, which unfortunately I do not have a physical book with me right now, and that is The Nightingale. My mother really wanted to read this book after she heard about it, so I've lent it to her, and I don't have it right now, but I do have something else. Snowball's going to be my stand-in for The Nightingale. The Nightingale is a World War II historical fiction. It's about two sisters that are living in France when it gets occupied by the Germans, by the Nazis during World War II. And if you know anything about World War II and the Nazis and how horrible they were, you can just imagine what these two women had to go through. They each have to go through their own trials and tribulations, everything from having a Nazi officer living in their house to trying to smuggle American and British airmen over the mountains to concentration camps. I mean, like, it just covers a whole range of atrocities. And that book, whew, oh my God, it is a very, very heavy read. I found myself crying multiple times in tears, just so shocked about what was happening, and then having to think in your head like this is really what people like had to go through. It's just horrible. But at the end of the day, I could not put this book down. I could not read through fast enough. At one point, I think I flipped to the end because I literally could not read fast enough, and I had to figure out what happened because that's the type of person that I am, reader that I am. So if you are looking for a new historical fiction and you have not read The Nightingale, definitely give it a try. Again, just be warned, it is a heavy read. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about my favorite just adult fantasy in general, not grimdark, although I've heard some people call this grimdark. It didn't seem that dark to me, but that is Mistborn. And funny story, but when I first started reading Mistborn, I didn't understand what the big deal was about it. Super popular book, super popular on Instagram, super popular on YouTube, and it wasn't until about halfway through when I was kind of like, okay, this is an okay fantasy, but I don't get what the big deal is. And then in the second half of the book, stuff really starts to change, really starts to pick up, and by the end, I was like, oh my God, wow, I cannot believe what I'm reading. So, needless to say, I really ended up loving Mistborn. It didn't make me cry, but it definitely shocked me, and it definitely made me, gasp a couple times, and definitely made me, flip to the back, kind of flip forward, which is something I do when I really like a book because I want to find out what happens, because I'm a crazy person like that. So if you have been on the fence about Mistborn, I would say give it a try, bite the bullet, give it a try. You have to read the whole thing to really appreciate it, which is something that I learned, so definitely make sure you do that. Again, I don't know if this will stay on my top 10 for the year, but we'll see what happens. So those are my favorite books so far this year. I have seen out there that there is a mid-year freak-out tag that talks about not just best books of the year, but a couple different other fun prompts. I may do that at some point when I come back from vacation if I have time. So if you like this video, which I hope you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel. And I do new videos every Sunday, Wednesday, sometimes on Friday. I'm trying to do more videos more often on Friday. All right, everyone, happy reading.